Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting from Washington, a city that has been essentially waiting for a big shoe to drop, and it's not dropping, at least not today. New reporting suggests that a potential third criminal indictment could be imminent for former President Donald Trump. But sources tell NBC News that Trump's attorneys met with prosecutors in the special counsel's office today, and we're told to expect an indictment against the former president in the special counsel's investigation into his efforts to overturn the 2020 election and, of course, the January 6th fallout. The former president on Truth Social confirmed that his attorneys met with DOJ this morning. He called the meeting productive, but said that there was no indication of notice given during the meeting. All of this comes as the grand jury is meeting today, but a courtroom deputy told reporters this afternoon no grand juries returned indictments today, and they don't expect any to be returned for the rest of today. Still, it certainly seems likely that something is about to happen soon, and the grand jurors haven't left yet, for what it's worth. Last month, a similar meeting between Trump's attorneys and the Justice Department happened just a few days before Trump himself announced that he'd been indicted for his mishandling of classified documents after he left the White House. Garrett Haake was outside the special counsel's office in Washington today. He joins me now to try to sort of give us some clarity of what, and look, we were just discussing if we want to simply apply the Jack Smith timeline from before to the Jack Smith timeline to today, we shouldn't expect an indictment today. So walk me through this.
Yeah, that's right. So in the classified documents case, we learned kind of after the fact that Donald Trump had been sent a target letter, and it was a couple of weeks before anything happened. Also, we knew about a meeting with Trump's attorneys. That had happened on a Monday. It was then that Thursday night that Trump posted on social media that he had been indicted. And we didn't see the indictment unsealed and find out any real details about it until the following day. So if we're operating on a similar timeline based on when Donald Trump received his target letter and when this meeting happened today, which is one of the few sort of signpost things we know actually happened.
I'm shocked they confirmed no indictments in the moment that they did. Like, DOJ has been so hard to get anything public out of them, right?
No, it's incredibly frustrating. And look, I think there's an opportunity here for some journalistic humility, that this is a secret process by design, and despite our best efforts, there are things we're not gonna know until the grand jury and the special counsel are ready to tell us. We're just not. And we're living in that space now. So compared to last time, now that we have enough data points on presidential indictments that we can compare, look, we're still on a target. Maybe it's next week. Maybe it's later than that. There's a million other things that could have been shaken loose by this target letter, which was the first really public element to this investigation that could have changed anything.
It is notable, because I know we've been trying to figure this out, that so far, it does not appear anybody else has gotten a target letter for January 6th.
That's right.
And an election overturn. That in itself is fascinating, because it would indicate there's a lot of cooperators.
That's one indication, or would indicate that they don't feel the same pressure to move on other people who might be targets than they do on Donald Trump, who's running for president and could conceivably, create any number of roadblocks, both perceived politically or by winning the election, in actuality, to his own prosecution. Look, Michigan has charged the fake electors in their states. We know, I think, Arizona.
They're looking into it, right? They've opened a probe.
Other states are looking into this. There are criminal charges to be had out there for a prosecutor who wants them, perhaps including Jack Smith.
But it almost makes more sense on the state level for those elector charges, isn't it? Because those are state laws.
Yeah, you could argue that. But if you're also going to look at this as some kind of grand conspiracy, then you would need multiple conspirators to kind of make that work. The fake electors would be, in my mind, sort of the easiest place to start.
So this meeting is essentially perfunctory? Like, anybody who's about to get indicted they get invited in? Is it a last chance to provide new information? In theory, what was this meeting supposed to be?
There's a couple different ways that could go here. Either this could have been initiated by the Justice Department and the special counsel, but more likely it was initiated by Donald Trump's attorneys. We don't know the answer to that question, but Trump did just add a new defense attorney to his team, I guess about a week ago now, this guy John Lauro. And
so maybe he needs to get up to speed.
Maybe he needs to get up to speed. Look, former federal prosecutors have said they have been in the situations in the past where they have had folks come in and essentially talk their way out of an indictment, but it is very rare. That said, if you're a high-priced defense attorney, you may want to be able to tell your client you did every possible thing to talk the Department of Justice out of this, even if you know it's futile, which a target letter often indicates it would be.
I know there are sometimes indictments that are sealed and we don't know about them and a lot of times that has to do with foreign criminals,
Yep.
right, where we have sealed indictment. Any reason to believe he's already been indicted and it's simply sealed?
I think it's unlikely. It's hard to imagine a scenario where, A, that secret holds this long, even in a process where we're all looking at it, and B, why have the meeting today if you've already made this decision to indict him? What are you going to do? Have the meeting, change your mind, and rip up the indictment vote?
And they're now on the record saying, hey, no, this grand jury produced no indictments today.
Right. So then they'd have to go back and answer
interesting-
what? For each and every individual day for the last 2 weeks since the target letter? I just don't see it.
Garrett Haig. It's a beat, man.
It's a living, Chuck. It's a living.
This is quite the beat, the indictment beat for Donald Trump. Thank you, sir. We're going to bring you any developments on former President Trump's legal situation as a development. Trust me, as a news organization, we are prepared, and we've been prepared. But we're going to turn now to the fragility of our democracy, and not just from the Republican presidential frontrunner facing criminal charges after interfering in the peaceful transfer of power. We're actually turning now to the fragility of our democracy because of something else. Our rapidly aging American political leadership. We got an unsettling reminder of that when Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell had a scary moment yesterday on Capitol Hill, freezing up for roughly 20 seconds while addressing reporters before having to be shuffled away by his colleagues. McConnell did reappear a few minutes later, said he was fine. His office said the minority leader felt lightheaded for a moment and was back on the Senate floor this morning. Look, for anyone following McConnell, it appears that the 81-year-old has seemed a little less sharp since he fell and was hospitalized for a concussion and broken ribs back in March. We've now learned that he fell again earlier this month while disembarking a plane. And senators today confirmed another fall earlier this year when he was in Finland. McConnell's Republican colleagues largely defended his fitness today, but also called for the leader to be a bit more transparent with his health condition.
He said he's fine. I take him at face value. You heard him respond to questions yesterday. He was very crisp in his answers.
What happened was disturbing. Everyone who watched that was concerned. But listen, Mitch is strong. He's stubborn as a mule.
Obviously, his first responsibility is to the voters of Kentucky. But once you become a leader, your responsibilities obviously are with other constituents, namely, at least in his case, 48 of his closest friends. So that probably does call out for a little more, I shouldn't say more, call out for more transparency than it would for somebody else. He should tell us if something bigger is going on, and whatever he tells me, I'll trust to be true.
So none of us, we're not doctors or medical experts, and no good doctor or medical expert would even attempt to diagnose on TV, or shouldn't. But anyone who has a family member at that age knows when you're in your 80s, falls and other health problems are often magnified and can have disastrous impacts. And right now, there are plenty of folks around 80 in positions of power in America. President Biden is 80. And as NBC reported earlier this week, the team around him has made adjustments and concessions due to his age in the hopes of avoiding viral moments that would reinforce voter concerns about his fitness. Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is 90 was hospitalized earlier this year due to shingles, appeared to have her own moment of confusion today when she was asked for her vote in a committee meeting. And folks, the aging of our political leaders is only going to be magnified as we approach 2024, when Biden will be seeking another 4 years in office at the age of 82, and his likely rival, Donald Trump, will be 78. As our friend Charlie Sykes wrote in The Bulwark following McConnell's scary moment yesterday, imagine if that had happened to Donald Trump or Joe Biden. One trip, one fall, one stumble, one moment when a political leader simply freezes in mid-sentence, goes blank, and has to be escorted away from the podium for a wellness check. The presidency would be hanging in the balance. And ask yourself as well, is either the Democratic Party or Republican Party prepared if something were to happen to their respective leaders? On one hand, they should be. Nobody's irreplaceable. But it's not an isolated issue in our current government. By the end of this year, we're going to have 16 senators, 44 House members and delegates, as well as one Supreme Court justice who will be 75 years or older. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is one of our Capitol Hill correspondents, Julie Sirkin. And Julie, I was surprised today by how many Republican senators were comfortable expressing their concern, obviously about not just concern about Mitch McConnell, but there seemed to be some concern about his ability to lead the conference.
Chuck, there was, but not as much as, frankly, I would expect after a moment like we witnessed yesterday, because I talked to lawmakers, even ones who weren't always in his corner, I'm sure you know exactly who I'm talking about, who reserve the right to judgment, essentially. They said that if and when McConnell feels like he is not up for the job, then he will communicate that to the rest of his conference. They also largely defended him, saying that during lunch, which happened just a couple minutes before that press conference, he was sharp. He was talking about all sorts of things. Later in the night, last night, he addressed a Major League Baseball conference, and pretty much every senator that I spoke to today said, oh yeah, we had a conversation with McConnell last night and he's fine, which I think is interesting as well, that they were speaking to the leader. So all of this, of course, boils down to this moment of age. And I'm glad that you talked about all of the other leaders that were watching kind of facing similar issues here. But everybody around McConnell, close to him, everybody around Senator Dianne Feinstein as well, trying to blame these momentarily lapses that we're seeing from them on them being too busy, on too much going on. That is literally something that a senator told me today, and what a Feinstein aide had to say after her moment this morning. But all in all, it's just going to continue to raise more questions.
Well, and the staff, I mean, you hate to put it this way, but the staff, they have incentive to say everything is fine. That's their job. That's their boss.
Exactly right. And I mean, look, it's going to get increasingly harder for these aides to these lawmakers who are aging, who are having these issues, because, again, this is not an isolated issue with McConnell, though he is in this position of power as the Republican leader. It's not an isolated issue with Senator Dianne Feinstein as well, who we've seen have these repeated moments, but their staff are the ones who often come under fire and try to, from at least reporters, to answer our questions as to why this is happening. But so far, I mean, really no dice.
Well, the voters put him there. At the end of the day, that is something that we should remember. Anyway, Julie Sirkin on Capitol Hill for us. Julie, thank you. So joining me now on set, USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page, Cornell Belcher, Democratic pollster, NBC News political analyst, and Jim Garrity, senior political correspondent for the National Review. You know, the joke about the age in the Senate, Fritz Hollings, who was the junior senator to Strom Thurmond for 12 decades, I think. Yeah. He, I think, once said, there's no better nursing home in America than the United States Senate. He was trying to be tongue-in-cheek. We've talked about this a lot, but it does seem acute because it's, and I think it's because of Biden and Trump, because we have two near octogenarians and an octogenarian as leaders of the two parties, plus you throw in Mitch McConnell, and had Nancy Pelosi still been there, we would have been throwing her into this list.
That's right. I mean, where's the moving to the new generation of leaders? Maybe not quite yet, except in the House. They have moved to.
By the way, there's a lot of people that were waiting for Nancy Pelosi to leave. Senator Chris Van Hollen, the now Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra. There have been plenty of people who thought they were going to be next, and she kept going.
Although when she finally stepped away, she did it in a way that she really stepped away. I mean, she has really let Hakeem Jeffries take over as the Democratic leader. So that's happened in the House. That has not happened in the Senate. That has not happened at the presidential level. And you were saying that the voters put them there. And for these members of Congress, for these senators, that's who they really need to. That's to whom they owe transparency, because those are the people for whom they basically work.
Cornell, it feels like any time anybody in government has a senior moment, it brings up Biden's problems. Biden hasn't had, he had the fall, but it was sort of, it immediately, that's just a fact of this campaign, isn't it?
Yeah, no, well, and it's how do you lean into that, right? And I think what they're starting to do is lean into that experience and leadership. And he can say, because of my experience and because of my years of actually getting this done, I can in fact reach across the aisle and get a bipartisan infrastructure bill. I can reach across the aisle and get things done. So it's leaning into that experience. But I mean, come on, Chuck. At some point, we got to make room for younger people at all levels of government. And it's increasingly difficult because so many young people say they don't want to get involved in politics now.
Because we have to wait forever. I remind people the reason we have this seniority system is because you had a Speaker of the House at the end of the 19th century who was just putting his cronies in. So that's why we created seniority. But now seniority, I don't think it's working the way we want it to work, Jim.
Chuck, my favorite observation about what we're heading into is that let's say Joe Manchin decides to run on the no labels ticket.
He's the young one.
He would be the youngest candidate in that three-person race.
And how old is Joe Manchin?
And finally, I believe he's 76. He's in his mid-70s.
Yeah, the younger version.
And so finally, the torch is being passed to a new generation of septuagenarians instead of octogenarians. The McConnell thing was scary. I think if you saw that happen to your father or to your grandfather, you wouldn't be a few minutes later coming back and saying it's okay. You'd be like, Dad, we want to have you checked out.
It's time to slow down. Well, you'd also say, look, you're trying to do too much. And I'm sorry, I think he probably didn't get the rest he needed after he had a concussion because of his job.
Apparently, he recently fell at National Airport.
Right.
And when you get to that age and you fall, the odds of a concussion get worse, odds of a broken bone get worse. Look, maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was dehydration, dizziness, something like that. It can happen. But you'd want somebody to check out. And I would have liked to have seen McConnell do this contrast with Trump and with Biden and say, here's my doctor. Here's what my doctor's saying. Talk to my doctor. Look, we had pictures of Reagan's hemorrhoids back in the 1980s. There was this effort.
I remember that. Michael Deaver, Susan Wood, they made sure it was. I remember I think Tom Brokaw would say, look, we're going to show a picture of his colon. You're right.
We're seeing more of the president than we ever wanted to see
before. But it is something they realized they didn't want that to become an issue.
Well, and transparency is the cure to speculation, right? So they ought to be transparent. There ought to be more information. Remember when they used to brief, who's that guy, Dr. Altman, who worked for the New York Times?
Yeah, no, he was
And
there.
the candidates would feel obliged to give an interview to him and give their medical records.
Some people got the tax returns. The medical records went to him.
And he would write about whether there was anything to be concerned about.
Remember John McCain's medical records?
Yes. Well, and
he disclosed them all.
As he did on many things. He was very transparent. That is so reassuring. And so, but we've gotten out of the habit of that with Trump and with Biden as well.
Well, but there's also this sort of, I don't know what to call it. It's a virus of older politicians believing they're irreplaceable. Okay? No, no one else can do this. McConnell, I'm sure people have told him, no, because you're the one you're the guardian of the gate, and no one else can replace you, Trump, with Trumpism. No one else can beat Trump, Joe Biden, right? Is that do we need to set age limits in order to cure that disease?
No, because ultimately I think the people should set age limits. Like it's what you said. I mean, the voters of Kentucky, they put him in office. And by the way, he delivers a lot for Kentucky.
He does.
So they get something out of it. As opposed to capping it, I'm much more interested in reforms that get more young people involved in it. And
by the way, why aren't more young people? I find the age minimums, the more you actually think about it, kind of absurd and ridiculous now. That we have decided you young men are not worthy of the United States Senate until you're 35.
Yes. But at the same time,
or 30.
But at the same time, look, we should want 25 and 30-year-olds to get involved in politics. But there's cynicism about politics and about the system broken, and more of them are turning away from politics.
And yet, our healthcare system, we're going to have a lot of very productive people in their 80s. There's a lot of people who are really productive in there. So I do wonder if there's going to be some ageism here.
Look, so there's old and there's sprightly, and you've got a certain energy level, and you seem to be doing fine. And then there's old, and look, Biden in that meeting with Herzog looked terrible, hunched over, speaking very softly, mumbly. Chuck Grassley doesn't get a lot of these questions. Chuck Grassley, if you talk about his age, he will challenge you to a push-up contest, and he will beat you, and he will make fun of you for not being able to do that. So if you can keep it up, fine. There are older guys and older gals who can keep up pretty well. 5 years ago, you didn't have nearly as many questions about Dianne Feinstein. Or 10 years ago. And that what she was 81 then?
I mean, I guess that's the issue, Susan, is that we've all, and unfortunately, we've all had these personal experiences where everything's fine until it isn't at a certain age. And one moment, one trip and fall on a staircase, and you're like, what happened to Grandpa?
No, not one moment with these candidates, these politicians. In both of these cases, there have been a series of moments that have raised questions. Feinstein had a lot of questions last time she ran for election, and the voters put her back in there. Maybe that was the right thing to do.
Can I get one quick thing in?
Yeah, no, because I wanted to turn it a little bit. This will become an issue.
Because I want to bring it back to the politics of it and why so much of the politics is broken. So we have all these leaders who are in their 70s or older. Chuck, when you look at Gen Z and the millennials, they're the largest voting bloc in the country right now.
Combined. Yeah.
And none of the leadership looks like that. And so when they look at sort of issues like environment and say, well, why aren't my issues being talked about? We are spending so much time in our politics talking about the issues of boomers and not about these young people.
But in theory, this should make the vice presidency a little bit more where the voters are going to be scrutinizing VPs.
Oh, absolutely. My assumption is that Kamala Harris begins every day knocking on the door. Joe, how you feeling? Okay, just checking,
But she's going to get scrutinized. Republicans are already using her.
Deservedly so, because
Kamala Harris, and they all use it as well. She's really the person that's...
Do we really think Joe Biden is going to be president of the United States when he's 86 years old? And if he is, what condition is he going to be in?
Okay, but the actuarial tables say yes.
Yes.
Believe it or not, once you hit 80, you're more likely to make it to 90.
I'm not asking will his heart be beating.
Yeah.
I mean, will he be in a situation where you're okay with him handling some crisis like Russia invading Ukraine?
But I assume this will increase scrutiny on whoever, let's assume Trump's the nominee, who Trump's picks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't think you're dabbling in Kerry Lake land.
That's right, because he's of a certain age as well. There'll be scrutiny of the vice presidents. There'll be questions raised. Do these candidates talk to their vice presidents about the possibility that they will take over? And I bet you they do not.
I mean, wouldn't you love to be Trump's vice president? Because the odds of another second mob trying to kill you have got to be pretty small, right? That's, what are the odds of the same thing happening twice?
You have a separate question for Trump, like, okay, am I putting my life? I know you put your life at risk. Am I putting my life at risk?
Mr. Trump, how likely is it that at some point you'll go irked and try to get an angry mob to kill me? 50-50, a little less.
Right, it is that. But you know that Kamala Harris's team does know that there is more scrutiny coming, and she does seem to want to, okay, I'll lean in more. If you're Team Biden, do you just lean into this?
Well, you have no choice. I mean, I think she is unique in scrutiny because, one, we've never seen a woman there, and we certainly never seen a woman of color in that place. And I'll let women talk about the difficulty of cracking the ceiling and how they are scrutinized different than we men at this table are. That said, if you look at her schedule this week and the past week, she is out there doing campaign events and meeting people in a way that typically you wouldn't see the vice president.
I was just going to say, I've noticed that too, and I've been wondering when we'd see more of that.
This is a change from the beginning of the presidency.
Yep.
And I think she decided she wanted to do more because she was getting bad reviews. And I think they decided they didn't have a choice to not have her be out there and have her be scrutinized. That is the reality.
The Republicans are going to put her into the conversation. She might as well participate.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you look back to 2019, there was a decent amount of talk about Biden's going to be a one-term president.
And he'll hand
it off.
Going to
pass the torch, and that he might not run for a second term. Obviously, he is. I find it interesting that I have yet to hear a single liberal columnist, a single Democratic lawmaker say, you know what? Biden should do one term. It's time for Kamala Harris to take over.
I think you're right. 4 years ago, we thought that would have happened. Is that a fair point?
No, because when the heck does that ever happen?
We just had a conversation about old people who never give up power.
No.
Yeah, nobody gives up the presidency. That is true. Jim Cordell. Susan, somehow we made ageism funny? I don't know. Man, we probably ought to back off of that a little bit. Anyway, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Coming up, Ron on the road again. Ron DeSantis is back on the trail after the presidential hopeful fired more than a third of his staff. Major campaign shakeup. Live in Iowa next, plus a young democracy. And a key U.S. partner in the war on terror is now in crisis. Soldiers in the West African nation of Niger have thrown their support behind a military coup that they say has stripped the democratically elected president of power. We're going to have a live report from Niger's capital city. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is back on the trail in Iowa, trying to see if he can get some momentum after just a series of setbacks for his campaigns, most recent being having to lay off a sizable portion of his campaign staff already. Campaign's been downsized by nearly half, cutting 40% of the staff amid concerns about campaign spending. Campaign has also had to fire a staffer who tweeted out Nazi imagery. DeSantis, meanwhile, has picked a fight with a Republican member of his own state's congressional delegation, criticizing Congressman Byron Donalds, who has endorsed Trump, after he pushed back very lightly, mind you, on the state's new teaching standards, which claim that slaves benefited from skills learned in slavery. Donalds called on Florida's Department of Education to, quote, correct this, but he called on the correction after praising everything else they did. And the DeSantis folks went after him like he was Kamala Harris. Gabe Gutierrez is in court on Iowa ahead of the DeSantis campaign stop tonight. And Gabe, it's obviously a campaign that's trying to get its sea legs back. I mean, it seems like they can't get good press, whether it's Rupert Murdoch's New York Post, whether it's somebody else's ex-Twitter feed, whatever we're calling it. What's it look like on the ground? I've seen some photos of not too many people waiting for him.
Yeah, Chuck, with this reboot. Governor DeSantis, though, is still staying with some of those culture war issues. You mentioned this battle he now has with the Congressman Donalds, who, of course, was a former ally and is pushed back, as you said, very lightly on this issue on African-American teaching standards. I want to get to some sound from Governor DeSantis just a short time ago, responding for the first time on camera to those criticisms over those standards. Take a listen.
So, the end of the day, you got to choose. Are you going to side with Kamala Harris and liberal media outlets? Or are you going to side with the state of Florida? And I think it's very clear that these guys did a good job on those standards. It wasn't anything that was politically motivated. These are serious scholars. You've seen Dr. Allen out on TV talking about the stories, talking about his own family history and everything like that. So don't side with Kamala on that. Stand up for your state.
And Chuck, look, the governor doubling down on that particular issue, but we want to get to the larger issue which you mentioned. Can this campaign actually reboot after laying off so much of its staff, burning through cash? And actually, the governor has already had 2 events today. You see right behind me his Never Back Down bus, of course, a super PAC that's aligned with Governor DeSantis. This was an event where he tried to do some retail politicking. He spoke with some families, some kids. He shook some hands. He petted some goats, what candidates typically do here in Iowa. But earlier today, there was another event which, yes, as you said, very sparsely attended, just a few dozen people, and the room was extremely small. Of course, we have been hearing for several weeks now that the campaign plans to focus on these more intimate settings. Of course, could just mean that they're really trying to save money, but certainly difficult days in the DeSantis campaign as it really tries to zero in on those early states. Iowa today and tomorrow, and New Hampshire early next week.
Gabe, is it a bit confusing? The super PAC doing the events and then the campaign provides the candidate? Is that how this works out here? And is it sort of awkward how they interact?
Yeah, certainly. And look, there are questions about the communication between the super PAC and the actual campaign. But yes, the events today organized by Never Back Down, that super PAC. And yes, Governor DeSantis showed up here. He was just here for a few minutes, and they tried to get some access to the press, to get him video of shaking some hands, slightly more access than we've had before. But this is a dance, doubling between what's going on with the super PAC and then also from the campaign. The campaign itself has been the one that has been really hitting back hard against Congressman Donalds. Chuck.
Gabe Gutierrez on the trail in lovely Iowa. Cannot wait to get your review of the state fair, my friend. Do not miss that if you've never been, Gabe. Get there. Anyway, thank you, sir. Up next, how a coup in Niger could derail U.S. efforts in the war on terror. And this has become a proxy fight with the Russians. We're going to take you live to the West African nation, where the attempted military coup is underway right now, and we're on the ground. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the President. Welcome back. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but Niger is an important security partner for the United States in West Africa and has been seen as a linchpin for the spread of democracy and Western values in the region. And sadly, things are spiraling into crisis in Niger. After a day of uncertainty in the country, a group of soldiers appeared on state television claiming they have overthrown the democratically elected president and have taken control of the government, citing deteriorating security situation and bad economic governance. Meanwhile, gunfire and protests erupted in the capital city, with supporters of the coup setting fire to the ruling party's headquarters. But President Bazoum seems to be standing firm, with the U.S. State Department this afternoon saying he is still the president of that country right now. The attempted coup of Niger's president, who oversaw the country's first peaceful transfer of power since gaining independence from France, is now raising concerns about the broader security situation in the region and is also drawing international condemnation. The UN Secretary General expressed his full solidarity with President Bazoum and called for his immediate release. And our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said he spoke with President Bazoum today and remains actively engaged with Niger's democratically elected government. Now, this attempted coup follows a string of successful military coups, including in neighboring countries Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad. So joining me now is our Pentagon correspondent, Courtney Cubie, who's been in Niger, and Mvemba, Phezo, Dizolele. He's the director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and he's going to give us a lot more context about U.S. strategy there. But I want to start with you, Courtney. I'm glad you're there for reporting purposes. We can't wait to have you home, and I know you can't wait to get home. What's the situation? What's the latest that you're able to ascertain on the ground?
So it's really hard to tell. I mean, everything from who's actually in charge here. We saw this video last night that you mentioned that included a bunch of different military leaders here. And it was a cross-section of people from the National Guard, the Army, even the Special Operations Forces, and even someone from the Presidential Guard, who are the initial group who took the president into custody or detention yesterday at the presidential palace. But it's still not clear who's actually in charge here. And I will say the curfew has just gone into effect here. It does seem tonight that it's that more people are abiding by it than what we saw even just last night. That's what this group announced, a curfew nationwide, ground stop of all air traffic, civilian and military aircraft, that's all aircraft. And they closed the borders for at least a week or so, but it's not really clear if that even could be extended. So today here in the Capitol, what we know is that unlike the protests yesterday, which were really focused around the presidential palace area and seemed to be people who were protesting the president's detention, today the protests were much bigger. They were around the National Assembly, which is not too far from there, but not in the direct area of the palace area. And they seemed to be protesting against the democratically elected president and in favor of this ruling military group. And they were a lot more fired up. They set a lot of cars on fire. There was smoke in the air here today for some time. And many of them were unfurling Russian flags. It's not really clear why that is. We've spoken with officials here for several days now. There's no indication that Wagner is behind this at this point. But, we also know that Vladimir Putin held this Russia-Africa summit today, and one of the things they talked about was whether Russia would be able to somehow help to restore calm here. I will say, the streets here right now have quieted down, probably because of the curfew, but there's no sense of any kind of real uprising except for over where the protests have been.
Courtney, do you have a sense of our military presence? Does it disappear if it appears President Bazoum is not going to retain power?
So this is the big question. If we start hearing the U.S. talk about this as a coup or a military coup, that triggers this U.S. law that will immediately force them to stop providing most of the aid. Now, a lot of that will include the U.S. military training mission. I mean, that's why we're here, Chuck. We came to see how the U.S. military is working with the Nigerian military to fight this growing presence of terror networks, not just in Niger here, but sort of in this whole West Africa, including coastal West Africa area. And you mentioned Niger as a linchpin. The reason for that is a lot of the two main groups they really converge on this area here. It's an ISIS affiliate, an Al-Qaeda affiliate. They're converging on this area. The Nigerian military has been a good partner to the U.S. in trying to combat that terror network. The concern here is if this is a military coup, if the president, democratically elected president, is actually ousted, a lot of that aid and a lot of this military presence here is going to end by law.
Right. All right, Courtney. Well, I hope we get you out quicker than a week there if that's the latest situation. But please stay safe, and thank you for that reporting. Let me see if we can get more context here with my expert guest here, Mr. Dizolele. Let me start with that disturbing report that protesters today supporting the coup were unfurling Russian flags. Does that surprise you?
Hi, Chuck. It's a pleasure to join you today. It doesn't surprise me. In all these protests we've been seeing across the continent, there's always somebody unfurling a Russian flag and so on. And it's very hard to know what to make of it. There are people in these countries who read everything that we read, have a certain nostalgia for Russia, especially in countries, bordering countries where the Wagner Group is present. Sometimes they get a sense that the Wagner Group is doing something good for those countries. We saw this in Burkina Faso, but I'll not read too much into it at this point. I mean, people can wave any flag they want to send all kinds of messages. At this point, I'll not read much into it.
What's your sense of what the military's involvement here? Because it's interesting. The U.S. has a good relationship with the Nigerian military. But if their leaders are involved in this coup, this sort of, it's almost as if the U.S. that's not a comfortable place for the U.S. to be. It looks like we're helping train the people who helped do the coup here. What's your understanding of the situation?
It's always challenging for the United States because in the U.S. there are so many laws that will trigger reaction to this kind of things. And this is what we see Secretary of State Antony Blinken struggling to define this as a coup. He calls it as an attempt to take power by force and so on. I think in the case of Niger, Niger is so important. It's one of those countries that are still standing in the region, trying to cling into democracy. But it's also very important because of the location. We always talk about location. This is equally important when you're fighting terrorism. Niger borders Chad, it borders Libya, it borders Algeria, it borders Burkina Faso, it borders Mali.
It's a tough neighborhood.
All of them are tough country going through a lot of tough time. So the U.S. cannot really afford to leave Niger, regardless of the outcome of this event now. I think the U.S. will continue to find a way to work with the Nigerian army. But I think it's also important that we understand that even when we talk about democracy, that's not enough. Mali used to be a democracy. I think the United States, that is, in the West, we invest so much on the security front. So the security side of the ledger gets so much money, so much attention. We don't do the same in building democracy, democratic institutions. We don't do the same in putting money in the social welfare of the populations. So there's a major gap. I've always said, if a country like Niger, with its democracy and democratic experience, or a country like Mali, when it was a democracy, were in Eastern Europe, they would have received a lot of support.
Right.
That does not happen when it comes to Africa. We talk one thing, we work a different thing.
No.
And that is problematic.
The Eastern European example is a terrific one. The amount of non-military aid that we would send over versus what is there. Let me ask you this. What is your sense of the population in Niger? Are they unhappy with their leaders? Is it possible they are supporting this coup?
Populations in Niger, populations in the entire band swath that we call the Sahel, are very unhappy with the political establishment at large. Not because they don't like democracy or anything, or not like they have a personal beef against these leaders, but the system is not delivering. People need education, people need jobs, and that is not there. Let's look at the case of Niger. Niger is the world's 7th largest producer of uranium. Very important ore, very important material. But they don't get the revenue that they deserve to survive on a daily basis. That is problematic. Niger has one of the highest fertility rates in the world. They still do not get the revenue they need for the few resources that have. Very important resources. France has been a colonial power there. France gets a lot of the uranium from Niger, but they don't pay the equivalent of what Niger expects. That is also a serious gap that is causing a lot of these challenges.
Really glad to have you on, Mr. Dizolele. I really appreciate it. I think we don't cover this enough, and I'm thankful we had somebody there on the ground to bring the story, surface it better, and you've given it some context that's desperately needed. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it.
After the break, why today's new GDP report is easing recession fears. The Fed raised rates again, highest level in more than 2 decades. But is it the last raise we will see this year? We'll have the latest on the economy next. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
The staff now has a noticeable slowdown in growth starting later this year in the forecast. But given the resilience of the economy recently, they are no longer forecasting a recession.
Welcome back. That was the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, yesterday suggesting that a recession is not necessarily imminent anymore. It's a view that's been backed up by a report from the Commerce Department today that our gross domestic product, GDP, grew at a faster than expected 2.4% pace last quarter. 4th consecutive quarter of growth after we had those 2 quarters of dips. Commerce Department also reported today that durable goods orders, it is for purchases like new cars and appliances, rose 4.7% last month. That was much higher than expected. And today's reports come amid several pieces of good economic news in recent weeks. In including the cooling of inflation and, most importantly, improved consumer confidence. It's all evidence that the economy may be an asset, not a liability for President Biden as he heads into an election year. Steve Leisman is CNBC's senior economics reporter and, more importantly, the unofficial criminologist, I guess, of the Federal Reserve speak. And that's really why I want to talk to you about this, Steve, which is, it was interesting, Libby, what is the likelihood now? We're not going to get rate cuts this year. I get that. But at this point, is it a 50-50 possibility that we're done with rate hikes for the rest of the calendar year?
I mean, I think that's where I would put it. Actually, Chuck, the market has it 60-40 against hiking.
Okay.
So that's the precise number in the futures market. So, look, it's all going to come down to the inflation numbers. Powell is not going to stand on an aircraft carrier at this moment with the words mission accomplished behind him. He's not ready to do that. He's been burned a couple times. The American people have been burned a couple times. We saw, I don't know if you remember, inflation coming down at the beginning of this year, then it sparked back up. So he's a little gun shy when it comes to inflation, and he wants to see it several months in a row be coming down. There's a sense, by the way, Chuck, going back to the 70s, that the Fed kind of abandoned the effort in the middle and didn't sit there and kind of like, what's the right way to put it? Pour enough buckets of water on the fire. He's going to be a park ranger here. Rather than you might go put 1 bucket of water, park ranger's going to pour 5 buckets of water on it.
So while he may not raise any more, the idea of this thing getting cut anytime soon, let me put it this way. The next time we see a rate cut, is that when we start to see a flashing yellow sign of an economic downturn?
No, not necessarily. So the Fed has raised rates to a level that it believes to be restrictive or to restrain the economy. As inflation comes down, the Fed doesn't have to be quite as restrictive, assuming it does come down. If inflation comes down, then the Fed can actually ease back on rates just to keep sort of less restraint on the economy. You know, think about it. You're holding back a horse here, to use another metaphor. At some point, you can let that horse run. You don't have to hold him back. Right now, the Fed is trying to hold on to those reins, keep the economy from being too hot. Now, the numbers it got today, that 2.4% GDP, was maybe not all that helpful. On the one hand, they like to see growth. You like to see the economy growing, business spending and consumer spending. But you want the economy running a little bit below potential to create slack and reduce the heat in the economy.
Let me ask you this. You have your version. You guys do the second best poll in American media after the NBC News poll.
After you guys, right?
But dirty little secret.
Debate it.
We use the same pollsters. But the economic pessimism in your poll versus the reality of the data versus consumer confidence. Give me your read. Is the perception of the economy improving or not?
So Biden's numbers in our last poll, his economic numbers, were up a bit. Some of the indications on the economy, the outlook was up a bit. They're still kind of lousy. They're not wonderful. And my explanation is this, is that inflation really is the most important thing out there for the American public. And it's not the inflation rate. That's the problem here. Americans probably don't even know what the rate of inflation is. Here's what they know. They know that eggs are more expensive. They know that gas, even though it's down, is somewhat more expensive. They know that things are more expensive. What they want to see to be more comfortable is they want things to be more affordable. All the Fed can do is focus on the rate of inflation, set the interest rate, try to restrain the economy. What I think the public wants, before it feels fully good about the economy and positive, is they want to see prices come down.
Steve Leisman. The man that I always turn to try to understand Fed speak. Thank you, sir. Good to talk to you. Still to come, we got some new economic and political turmoil in China. Obviously, it's an opaque place sometimes, but the world's second largest economy faces rising unemployment rates, particularly among its youth, mounting questions over what happened to its foreign minister. Is the foreign minister getting scapegoated for their economic issues? You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. After the abrupt removal of its foreign minister, Xinjiang, China's foreign ministry seems to be trying to erase any mention of him, wiping him from the website completely and sparking increased intrigue about Beijing's opaque political system. According to the New York Times, China's foreign ministry spokesperson called the speculation malicious hype, but was unable to answer dozens of questions about Xin. And the official transcript of the briefing omitted any question about Chen, raising even more questions. No reason was given for Chen's ouster just 7 months into his tenure, but it comes after he had not been seen publicly for weeks, including canceling a meeting with the EU's foreign policy chief and missing a diplomatic summit of Southeast Asian nations. The tumult within China's political system comes as Beijing is facing its own economic challenges. Its post-COVID economy stalled. Youth unemployment is through the roof. The jobless rate among people ages 16 to 24 reached a record high of 21.3% last month, and that's according to the Chinese government. There are some estimates that it's double that. Joining me on set is Dean Cheng, Senior Advisor to the China Program at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Dean, thanks for coming in. So let's start with what's going on with the foreign ministry first. Bringing back Wang Yi, a former foreign minister, you were just telling me he's more powerful than ever. Walk me through that.
So he is not only now the foreign minister, but he, just before he stepped into that position, he headed the party's Central Foreign Affairs Department. So really, in the Chinese system, the party in many ways trumps the state. So now we have combined in the person of Wang Yi both the state position, foreign minister, probably he will become state counselor if Qinggang completely disappears, and he has the party. So he gets to set policy and implement policy.
And the last time he was foreign minister, he was not in this role in the Politburo, correct?
No, he was not. That was Yang Jiechi, so who has now basically stepped aside and retired.
So if he's got this much power, and frankly, he was there during a much more peaceful time with the United States, what should we read into this?
Let's remember that when he was foreign minister, China began its wolf warrior diplomacy.
True.
When you had Chinese ambassadors lecturing the French and the Swedes, etc. So I don't think what we're going to see is a stepping back. If anything, Wang Yi is probably going to be as hardline as he was before.
Interesting. Is there, because there's a little bit of the economic situation. She's under some pressure here. This is all his calls. I look at their relationship with the West is causing their economic problems. That's why is there anything to connect these two things?
Well, I don't, one, let's be honest, we don't really know what happened to Qinggang. So it's possible that it's personal issues, it's possible that there's internal scandals, and it's possible that this is a power play.
Could he be scapegoated? That's what I was asking. Is he being set up to be the scapegoat for what?
Well, given that Qing's rise was attributed to Xi Jinping, making him the scapegoat is certainly a possibility. Xi is saying, it's not my fault, it's this guy. However, I think that much more likely is that we're seeing some other issues developing on the economic side that are separate from Qing's rise or fall.
The reports about youth unemployment, I mean, if you were to look at, if he looks at his domestic security situation, I'd look at nearly 50% of youth unemployment, which is one estimate. We're not, Chinese government says one thing, and would think that is a worrying sign for me because the youth could come out after me.
Absolutely. And the Chinese figures, when we had access to them, indicated China actually spent more on internal security than external security. That should be very sobering. All those new aircraft carriers, stealth fighters, and all that, and the military was in second place.
To whatever domestic surveillance and things like this?
Exactly. And the reason for that is exactly what you're referring to. It is the reality that you have a lot of unhappy people in China, whether it's unemployed youth, people who are watching property values evaporate, people who are suffering under corrupt and mismanaged local leadership.
Right. So what does this mean for, I mean, look, the fact is, you know, it's ironic, some of our economic woes have to do with the tariffs we've been putting on in this war with China. We've not brought those back, but those have also impacted there. What do you expect? Do you expect an attempt at a reset?
I think what we've seen from the Chinese National People's Congress is a lot of words to that effect, but there's no indication Xi Jinping is actually prepared to do the kind of hard economic reforms which would have to involve him letting go of some of that centralized power.
What would that look like? I mean, is there an idea that he might actually take, that he would release something?
No. I mean, realistically, it would be things like, for example, allowing people to travel more freely within China so that you could put labor where it needs to be. It means basically...
Because I saw young people won't take teaching jobs in certain regions for fear they can't come back to their home city.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or in other cases, because the local areas aren't willing to take people from the countryside and are preferring their own locals. Another piece of this is that state-owned enterprises would have to be held responsible and basically have to show a profit. Instead, right now, they have open access to Chinese state-run banking to meet their bottom line.
A lot of chatter in the what I would call the foreign policy world of media. Are we past peak China? What would you say?
I'm old enough to remember when we had already hit peak oil.
Okay.
And we are now consuming and producing more oil than we ever did. China is still 1.2, 1.3 billion people. And I think it's a little presumptuous to count out a 5,000-year-old civilization.
Is it better to say it's more peak Xi?
That could be. And frankly, I would much rather be Joe Biden than Xi Jinping in terms of the problems confronting.
I don't want to make it seem as if it's a democracy, but there is something about third terms. Anybody, you look at it, people that try third terms end up regretting a third term.
Absolutely. And because eventually it catches up with you, and there's no one else who's going to be held responsible if you've been in power.
I was just going to say, he has nobody else he can lay this on anymore, right? This is all his people. This is all him now, right?
Never underestimate the power of a state-owned press to change reality. But certainly, realistically speaking, a whole lot of people in China are saying, I'm not better off under you now.
Is there a sense of where is he right now when it comes to bringing back Wang Li? What I'm curious about, is that something that he decided to do or the Politburo told him he had to do?
No, I think at this point, especially after the most recent Congress, he runs the Politburo.
Okay.
But the reality is Xi Jinping has gotten on a tiger he cannot get off of. If he tries to step down, which he's not going to, all those people he has offended with his anti-corruption efforts and all that are going to have their knives out.
He's done his purge, hasn't
he? There has been an ongoing purge since he took office in 2012.
Anyway, Dean Cheng from the U.S. Institute of Peace. Boy, the brain power over there gets better and better. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Thank you all for being with us this hour. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.